Council. I'm the Traffic Safety Program Manager here, and I also work with the Network of Employers for Traffic Safety. Welcome to this webinar today. As many of you know, we have a new law that is going to be coming up here real soon in August. You've been probably hearing it on the radio, reading about it in the paper, and seeing it in the news. And today we're going to talk about reasonable suspicion and how that has changed or will change with the new law. That's one of the bigger changes with the new law coming up. So please help me welcome Don Moroz. He is going to be our presenter today. And we will go ahead. If you have questions during this, by all means, ask them, raise your hand, put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. And then if there's enough time at the end, we will be doing some questions at the end as well. Thanks, Don. Go ahead.
Thank you all. Appreciate you jumping on today. I suspect a bunch of you are probably on yesterday's webinar as well with Craig Trepanier from the kind of the legal side of it. I'm going to talk about the reasonable suspicion side of it. And quite honestly, my whole presentation can be wrapped up in about 8 seconds here. The reasonable suspicion with legalization of marijuana isn't going to change anything that you're going to do. All right, now we'll talk more about this. We'll cover that throughout the day here. But from the reasonable suspicion piece, there's not a whole lot that really needs to change in your policies. Now, there's a lot more that goes into that, certainly from the testing side, and I will touch on that a little bit. If you caught Craig's presentation yesterday, he certainly did a much deeper dive. That's his expertise. Mine is more on the impairment signs and symptoms side of this. So my background, I spent 32 years with the Minnesota State Patrol and 27 years with the Metro Transit Police. And through the entirety of my career, I spent training police officers on how to better detect impaired individuals behind the wheel of a car, be it alcohol, marijuana, or any other of the million things people take in order to get high. So I'm more from the signs and symptoms. Is that person under the influence? I will relate my experiences on the roadside to the workplace here for you, because a lot of folks think, well, that's great, but we don't do law enforcement related stuff. We don't have anybody driving cars as part of our business. Maybe that applies to you. But what I did for a living for over 30 years and what you do for a living as far as the reasonable suspicion piece really aren't any different. If we look at it from a 30,000 foot view, they aren't any different here. So I'm going to fire up my PowerPoint here. When I do that, I'm only going to be able to see my screen. So as Lisa mentioned, she's going to monitor the chat here. She'll throw in any questions as we go along. If you've got them, she'll jump in with those questions for you. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. And then again, if we have time at the end, we will just sit and chat a little bit more and answer any questions. So I'm going to knock my camera down here so I can save a little bandwidth, and I'll bring up my PowerPoint and we'll get you started here. All right, Lisa, can we see this?
You're good.
All right. All right, folks, let's talk marijuana in its various forms here. We've got a whole bunch of new definitions in the statute. I'm not going to go through those. So when I say cannabis products or something similar to that today, I'm talking about all the different things that we have now defined in the Minnesota law as cannabis products. And I'll touch on a couple of those as we go through here, just so you know that there are different things. In some of my slides, I say cannabis, etc. So instead of putting the 7 or 8 or 9 definitions or whatever we have now in our statute, it's just I'm going to use one large umbrella for cannabis or cannabis products. So from a reasonable suspicion standpoint, really, what's our goal here? And no pun intended, we can distill this down just to the last 2 words on the slide here: workplace safety. And we think of all the workplace safety things that you've got in place in your particular workplace. That might be eye protection and ear protection and steel toe shoes, and it's driving classes. If you have folks driving your company vehicles, maybe you put them through some safe driving courses, or it's hazmat training or confined space training. All that stuff goes into the silo of workplace safety. And a lot of times people think, well, reasonable suspicion, well, that's over there somewhere else. And it really ought to be in that same silo, because if folks aren't doing what they're supposed to do, if they're not 100% on the job, if they don't have the knowledge and skills and all the things that we need to do our job safely, it puts them and other people at risk, puts the company at risk, puts the production line, et cetera, at risk. All right, so at least I got a video here, and I've got a few videos, so hopefully these are working.
It is.
Thank you. Okay, as you can see, that came out of Colorado when they legalized cannabis products a handful of years ago. They approached it like, well, it's a legal substance now, and we just want you to get into the car. So this is a driving kind of PSA there, and it's a little bit humorous, and it's kind of aimed at those individuals and that kind of that demographic that are probably going to be the ones most likely to use cannabis-related products. Yeah, do things happen to folks? Sure they do. But just don't get in your car, right? And we'll again apply that to the workplace. Don't come to work high. Really, that's the bottom line. Again, of this whole reasonable suspicion piece is it's a legal substance, but you can't come to work high, for lack of a better term there. So why do we train? Again, if that person is not 100%, is it because of drugs and alcohol? Are they under the influence? Is it a medical situation? Could they be quote unquote medically impaired, if that's even a term? But for our purposes, we'll kind of talk impairment as a whole here. Somebody that's not 100%, we take them off the production line. Then we just got to determine what their issue might happen to be. Is it drugs and alcohol? Is it a medical situation? Are they just tired? Yeah, my kid was sick. I only got 2 hours of sleep last night. So there's a solution for all those things, whatever it happens to be. So just because we think something's not right and we take somebody out of the production line, out of their workspace, et cetera, that doesn't necessarily mean we're always going to finish this as a reasonable suspicion. They must be drunk or high. There's a million different things. And what I did for a living, stopped thousands and thousands of folks in their cars over the years. Certainly not all of them were under the influence. And even ones that I thought, holy cow, what's going on here? They're weaving across 3 lanes of traffic, almost hit the guardrail. I got to stop the potentially dangerous situation here. For me, it was get the car to stop on the shoulder. It would be, let's get them off the production line, off their backhoe, whatever it happens to be, and then figure out what's going on. And of all those times that I saw that egregious driving conduct, it wasn't a definitive. Every time I approached those individuals, they were drunk or high. You've all seen it on the road. Somebody's putting on makeup or shaving or eating a bowl of cereal, got their dog in their lap on their phone, and that's affecting their driving. Maybe it's mechanical, maybe it's medical. There's a million things, but we have to further our observations, our quote unquote investigation, if we want to look at it that way. Stop the potentially dangerous thing from happening, figure out what's going on, find a solution there. So I would suspect most policies out there have some sort of a piece in it that says, hey, let's get a second set of eyes, ears, nose on this person to see what we see, smell, and hear on that individual. Let's send a second supervisor, another lead worker, or somebody that can go and make some observations. Not to say that the first set of observations that were reported or observed aren't necessarily true. We just want to make sure we have a stronger base. 2 sets of eyes, ears, and nose on the person just gives us a stronger base. And yes, I see, smell, and hear something. I'm not sure that they're under the influence. I see what you're talking about. Let's just keep an eye on it. So it's not yeah, you're wrong. We're just going to move on. But it's like, yeah, maybe there's something there. We'll just pay a little more attention to it. We're not going to take them off their workspace right now. And then that presence doesn't necessarily equal impairment. And what I mean by that is testing is great. And I'll talk a little bit about testing later on. And it has come a long way in the last couple of decades here. But all it tells you is what is in that person. It doesn't tell you necessarily that they're under the influence. And yeah, you've got zero tolerance for alcohol and probably heroin and a bunch of other drugs that are out there. But all it tells you is what's inside that person. Now, is it a violation to come to work with certain substances in your system? Maybe you have zero tolerance, I suspect, for some things. Okay. But how about all the over-the-counter stuff and all the legal prescription stuff and all the things that people can take and legitimately have in their system? Just because it's there doesn't mean I'm necessarily under the influence. So that's why we couple a reasonable suspicion observations in with our testing. And that just, again, gives us a much stronger base here. So again, why do we train here? And this is from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And this was just the marijuana related stuff. Now, again, presence of, so this was just the fact that they came back with marijuana in their system. So we have to put a little asterisk to this, but 75% greater absenteeism, 55% more accidents, and 85% more injuries just solely for marijuana and cannabis related products. So let's talk just briefly about impairment. What is impairment? Comes in two different ways, and more often than not, we are focusing on the physical piece. So we'll define impairment as somebody not being able to do something they quote unquote normally do. And we'll just call it that for now for our purposes here. And what is normal, and that's different for everybody. And you'll know what normal is for your workers. In my profession, I worked on generalities. Most people don't look like this, act like this, smell like this, etc. You know what normal is. Don's never looked like that. He's never acted like this. He's never said this, smelled like this, whatever the situation is. So again, the physical stuff, we focus on that because it's easy to observe, easy to detect, easy to articulate. I'm falling down, I'm running into stuff, I'm dropping stuff. That's easy. But impairment can come cognitively too. And when we talk about cognitive, it's the way my brain processes information. Maybe I forget a step in the 10-step process that I need to do here. Maybe I have a hard time. I'm just slowed down because my brain can't process the piece of material that comes down the production line, and I have to do what I have to do before I move it along. And when I talk about cognitive, I also talk about what your brain tells your body to do. So a little bit later, we'll talk about pupil sizes. If the substance, for example, marijuana, cannabis related products will increase the size of your pupils. They will dilate. And there's nothing you can do about that. So even on a very bright situation, you walk outside on a sunny day, your eyes might not constrict the way that they are supposed to do. So again, that's more cognitive stuff I can't control that my brain tells my body to do or not do in certain, in certain situations here. So we have to kind of pay attention to that cognitive side of it as well. Sometimes the cognitive drives the physical. My brain can't process the information, so my body can't do what I'm supposed to do. So yeah, sometimes they go hand in hand, but using the old tired cliche, we got to think outside the box sometimes, that it's not just physical stuff. Don't wait for that physical stuff. Yeah, Don's, I don't know, he just seems a little off today. Yeah, he's a little slowed down. He's not figuring stuff out or whatever. But he's not running into anything. He's not dropping stuff. He's not showing any physical impairment, so he must not be drunk or high. That is not the case. All right. So we have to keep our brain on that as well. So one of my catchphrases when I talk about reasonable suspicion is, it is as little as, that seems weird. Okay. Don's never done that before. He's never acted like that before. That is something you need to pay attention to. Now, that is not necessarily get you all the way to reasonable suspicion, because there is no silver bullet. There isn't one thing that means one thing. If you see, smell, or hear one specific thing, that doesn't necessarily mean absolutely that they're under the influence, but it ought to get you paying attention and kind of leaning in that direction. Again, I'll just reference the pupil since I mentioned that. We're outside on a very sunny day and my pupils are large, and you happen to notice that. You might go, that's weird. Why would somebody's pupils be that large in a very bright situation? Maybe it's your production floor is very well lit, or again, maybe we're outside. But if you tell yourself, that seems odd, don't shrug that off. That is something that's like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this. Maybe it goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't, but at least it gets us to pay attention. All right, so when we talk about cannabis and cannabis-related products here, obviously we'll kind of look down the left side or that picture on the left. We'll go down from top to bottom for the first couple of here. So marijuana, when we say marijuana, that is typically the dried, chopped up flower, the leaves, the plant material rolled into a joint, stuffed into a pipe, put in a bong, however they're going to ingest it that way, typically smoked, certainly. Concentrates for the kind of middle and bottom of the left side of that picture there. Typically, it was hash oil, and hash in the middle and hash oil on the bottom there. Up till about, maybe 5-6 years ago, we started seeing a lot of different things: butane honey oil, wax, shatter, butter. Weed diamonds. If you've never heard of weed diamonds, the picture on the bottom of the slide there, those kind of clear, kind of crystalline nodules, that started out as marijuana flower. That started out as plant material marijuana. I won't go through the whole processing. If you want to see how people make weed diamonds, just Google weed diamonds, go to YouTube. I'm sure there's about 1,000 videos that show you how to make weed diamonds, but essentially it's start with the plant material, pressure and heat. So they'll use a hair straightener. And when they use the hair straightener and kind of drag it through this slurry that they make, the stuff that comes out the end ends up in weed diamonds. That is virtually 100% THC, which is the active ingredient in there. We know about the edibles. We'll mention edibles as well. We have something called artificially derived cannabinoids. That is something, and I put that in quotes because that comes out of Minnesota statute. That would typically be things that we have been seeing over the last year or so, legally sold. When you think, oh, we don't have legal marijuana in Minnesota or legal cannabis in Minnesota, and we see places selling Delta 8 and Delta 10 products, et cetera. There's a whole bunch more that are involved in there. That is, by definition, an artificially derived cannabinoid. And then synthetic cannabinoids, which in the kind of upper right there, just a picture of something called Spice, but there's a million different street names on that as well. And that basically starts in a lab. That doesn't at all come from the plant material. All the rest of the stuff generally comes from the plant, starts with the plant material. Synthetic cannabinoids don't. We'll touch on all of these. So again, as I mentioned, comes out of the cannabis plant. And if you had asked me 5 years ago about marijuana, I would have probably said something like, we know everything we're ever probably going to know about marijuana. We know that it's Delta 9 THC on the one side, and one fork. Think of a fork in the road here. The left fork is the Delta 9 THC. That's the side that gets you high. The right fork of the road is CBD, that allegedly, arguably has some medicinal properties, and that's the stuff that doesn't get you high, but has some effects on the body. And I said, yeah, we probably know, like I said, we probably know almost everything we're ever going to know, how they grow it, what the psychoactive, what the non-psychoactive chemicals are, how they ingest it, etc. Now, if you ask me today, I'd almost be 180 degrees from there and say, we know nothing. Delta 8, had never heard of it 2 years ago. Delta 10, hadn't heard of it 2 years ago. THCO, THCP, THCA, HHC. I'm not going to go through all these, but there's a million different things out there now. And even on the CBD side, there's CBG, there's CBR, there's CBN. There's all kinds of different stuff on that side too. So science is pretty good, whichever way we want to think of it, for good or for not so good, but wherever that is, or wherever you land on the recreational side, doesn't matter to me. But again, what science has done just in the last 5 years, give or take, is amazing. And all the things that we see, just the way that they ingest it, et cetera. So it's still the primary psychoactive ingredient is the Delta 9 THC. In a year, I might have to take that out. In fact, I even underlined it here in my slide over the last about year or so. It's like, well, that's still the primary one. Not to say there isn't a whole bunch, and we may see a shift in that. Maybe Delta 9 will fall by the wayside eventually here. But as it stands now, Delta 9 is still kind of the number one psychoactive chemical that is in the cannabis plant. So this is kind of interesting here. We've all heard that cannabis has been used, however, recreationally, medicinally, whatever, for thousands of years, through hundreds of generations. But it wasn't until 1964 that science actually figured out that it's THC. That's the chemical in there that gets you high. So for thousands of years, we know, well, it does this stuff. We just don't know why. So we're talking just shy of 60 years ago, we finally figured out the chemical that is in there that gets you high. And it was only about 35 years ago, give or take, that scientists figured out what it does in the brain. So again, when we talk about science, this is still pretty new stuff. So that's why we've seen a big kind of change over the last few decades here, and a lot of information. And like I said, certainly over the last just 5 or give or take 5 years, what we've really seen, and science has really figured out a lot of stuff just in the last few decades here. So we've made kind of leaps and bounds in the cannabis arena. So just like anything, depending on the strength of the THC, the amount of THC in there, if I'm, just a couple of decades ago, smokable stuff, I bought a baggie of flour, plant-based stuff, I was going to roll into a joint, it was in the single-digit THC levels. Now, if I buy a baggie of flour, you're probably in the 20 plus, maybe into the 30s THC. But those concentrates, like I said, the weed diamonds, the butter, the shatter, the wax, that's 90%. So the argument that cannabis is just cannabis and it's always been cannabis, that I just shake my head when I hear those kind of statements, because it's not. And I'll equate things to alcohol as we talk through the day here, but marijuana and alcohol are completely different animals. They act completely different in the body, but I will try to kind of equate that because we know so much about alcohol, just for example purposes. So when we're talking about this, if you had a glass full of beer, a 12-ounce glass of beer, and I had a 12-ounce glass of Jack Daniels, and we both said, well, it's just alcohol, right? It's the same thing. It's just alcohol. We'd look at each other and go, that's the silliest statement I've ever heard. So that's kind of what we're equating to here. It is a different world when we're ingesting different things. So we got to be aware of that as well. So when we start talking about our signs and symptoms here, in fact, I think I'm going to skip through these because they'll come back.
This car's been stopped for quite some time.
We got a video
Let's
here
check
for
it
you.
out.
I'll come back to the divided attention.
Excuse me. Have you been smoking any pot today?
No,
Well, you've been stopped here for 15 minutes. Can you tell me why that is?
we're waiting for the stop sign to turn green.
How high are you?
Hi, how are you?
No, I said, how high are you?
Hi, how are you? This cop is so friendly, babe.
Okay, I am going to have to conduct a pot sobriety test.
Oh man, I'm too high for that.
Blow into this?
Hey, is that a breathalyzer?
No. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a few questions to determine your ability to drive. Why is a pizza box square when the pizza's a circle and all the little slices are tiny triangles?
Whoa.
Which of these two snacks would you prefer? Chips or the cookie dough? Step out of the car, please. Let's go.
Please, don't drive high. We're getting cookie dough all over the back of our cruisers. A message from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Okay, that's done as humor, entertainment, but when we talk about our quote unquote stereotypical stoner, or whatever that happens to be, maybe it's Cheech and Chong, depending on your generation. Maybe it is Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, or it's the dude from The Big Lebowski, or it's Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. I suspect I probably got every generational group here on the call today. Whatever that happens to be, they're all that same person that we just saw in the video. And again, we do it for humor, we do it for entertainment value, but all of the stuff that we saw there is legit. Yeah, those aren't made up. Those, when we do those things, again, from that entertainment, that pop culture standpoint, we're not making stuff up. All that stuff happens. Now, it might not happen to that degree, but all that stuff is actually there. So when we talk about what cannabis does to the brain here, and it affects executive function. And what is executive function? I'm just going to throw all these things up here. As I touched on a second ago, what's divided attention? You saw the skip those slides to move ahead to this one. What is divided attention? From the time my feet hit the ground every morning when I roll out of bed until the time I crawl back into bed tonight, I divide my attention between mental and physical tasks. Now, sometimes more mental, sometimes more physical, depending on what it is, and things that we divide our attention between. It's coordination and balance and information processing and judgment and decision making and a bunch of other stuff. So from a 30,000 foot view, yes, all those generalized things. But from a 30-foot view, you know specifically what do my employees need to divide their attention between these physical tasks, these mental tasks. And when you see those things fall by the wayside, that's a problem. And it kind of goes into that cognitive piece. Like I said, our brain isn't processing, it's skipping steps, it's forgetting to do things. So that's the divided attention piece, kind of, again, for focusing attention, part of that, and instructions and planning. I'm not going to go through everything on the list here, but this is what executive function does in our brain. So if we think about what we do, think about, again, the specific jobs our employees do, and think about the things on the list here that they need to do to complete the tasks as part of their job. When those things fall by the wayside, we start to recognize those and start to make us go, huh, that's a little weird. Why are we missing these steps in the process today? So we add cannabis to there. Again, how does that affect executive function? Our ability to divide our attention, our concentration, decision making, reaction time, all the things that you see on the list here. And again, you can apply those to the specifics of your individuals here. All right, so somebody who's under the influence or is impaired by cannabis, some general signs that we might see. So we have all those kind of cognitive things there, and then some additional things that might pop up here. If they are smoking, you'll get the odor of the burnt marijuana. Now, we know that it's getting extremely popular to use edibles and other products. A lot of times the things that people vape, so some of those concentrates, they have very little, if any, odor whatsoever. So I suspect everybody has had the experience where you've walked out of a store, you walked out of your house, you're driving down the street, and all of a sudden you get the big whiff of the burnt marijuana, and you think to yourself, where is that coming from? Is it the car in front of me? Is it somewhere out in the middle of the parking lot here at the Target or the Walmart I'm coming out of? But it is very prevalent and it is very strong. Somebody who is vaping some of the concentrate products, quite honestly, somebody standing next to me, this might be the statement I would have, or what my brain would say. That kind of sort of smells like it might possibly be marijuana. I mean, that's how confident you'll be. So smoking the flower, I can smell it from 100 feet away if the wind's right. They're like at 30 miles an hour in my car driving down the street. Vaping, a lot of times, because the process takes out a lot of what are called terpenes, the things that give us those odors, we might not smell those things. Now, some of those vaping products, actually, the folks that derive those from the flower, they will add some of the terpenes back in because it's not only odor and it's a little bit of the taste, and that's part of what we call the entourage effect. I won't go into all that for you today, but so we may have some of that odor. I'm not saying everybody that vapes, you won't get any odor, but a lot of it you won't. So they might not smell like that odor of burnt marijuana. Even if, if I was sitting in my car vaping and think, all right, it's going to get soaked into my clothes and everything else, or we're going to smell that, you might not. So again, nothing's a silver bullet here. Nothing's 100%. We talked about that perception of time and distance. Again, somebody that is ingesting cannabis products, their eyes will get that kind of reddish haze to the whites of their eyes, almost like they took red or pink food coloring and dropped it into their eye. They might have some body tremors, some eyelid tremors. Somebody might be standing at their station and you walk by and you happen to glance over and their legs are shaking, almost like they're shivering, like they're freezing cold. Well, if it's not freezing cold and you look and you go, well, that's kind of interesting. What's going on with that? Again, if it makes you go, huh, that's weird, and I've seen this hundreds of times, individuals whose muscles just tremor when they are under the influence. One thing that at least certainly the smoking side of cannabis products does is the retards the production of saliva in our mouths. So we kind of get kind of a pasty kind of coating on our tongue. If I'm smoking because of the product, it might be kind of a light greenish or kind of have a greenish tint to that. Might have cotton mouth. Somebody might be complaining of being extremely dehydrated, or they're just drinking a lot of fluids. Now, again, no silver bullet there. Folks might just want to stay hydrated, etc. But roll that into some of our other observations, and we might start to think these things all start to kind of come together. Our inhibitions are relaxed, they're kind of laid back, carefree, don't care what's going on around them. They might giggle when you say something serious. They might have a reaction that is not consistent with what's going on around them. We might start to see a lot of folks getting to that paranoia stage. Typically, that is with non-tolerant users. So myself, if I smoked a bunch, ate a couple of edibles, took a big chomp out of a chocolate candy bar, an edible cannabinoid candy bar, I'm probably going to get to that paranoia stage, right? Because I've taken more than I typically do. So with it being legal now, we might start to see individuals who aren't tolerant users starting to kind of get into this a little bit. And if they take too much, they might get some paranoia there. We've all heard that, somebody under the influence of the marijuana or that uses marijuana gets the munchies. That's a legit thing. In fact, on the medicinal side, a lot of times that is a benefit when we look at that. So again, arguably it's for medicinal purposes. Yep, we're going to give you a cannabis-related product, make you a little bit more hungry so you can keep your nutrition up and keep your strength up. We talked about that divided attention piece, and I did mention those dilated pupils at work. So. All right, so here's a little scenario example here for you. So Kathleen's a new addition to the IT desk, reliable, punctual, people like her, customers like her, folks in the company like her. She always seems to do everything that they've asked them to do, and it's like, she's a great employee. But you do notice that she goes out to her car on every break, so 3-4 times a day, break in the morning, lunch break, break in the afternoon, whatever. Then she goes out to her car. And when she comes back, she's a little more jovial, a little more outgoing. She's cracking jokes. She's laughing out loud, kind of a carefree attitude. Lasts for a few hours, a couple, 2-3 hours. And then it starts to wane, but then it pops back up after the next break. Cubicle's always dark. And a lot of people always comment, it's like, how can you see what you're doing here? It's always so dark in here. And then she uses eye drops a lot because she says she has allergies. Now, you look at any one of those things, or even if you look at this scenario as a whole, you think big deal, but we start to look at it and we think, okay, why does her attitude change a little bit when she goes out to her car? And then when she comes back, that lasts for a couple hours and it starts to wane and then it pops up again. So kind of some peaks and valleys of her personality a little bit, or how she approaches other individuals. Cubicle's always super dark. Why? Her pupils might be large from the consumption of those cannabis products. So if it's bright in there, that's going to hurt her eyes. So we're going to keep the lights down in there. And then she's trying, using eye drops, and that's maybe to knock some of that redness down. So that's not so noticeable. And again, we look at this thing as a whole and you might think, I don't see anything here, but we start to go, it's odd. This is odd. This is different. This is strange. And we start to lump those things together. We might end up going down that reasonable suspicion route. All right, real briefly on drug testing in the workplace. Again, I'm not the lawyer. That was Craig's deal yesterday. So, but I will talk a little bit about testing, and that's kind of the $1 million question now that we hear a lot for individuals in the workplace. It's like, well, so what happens now when it's legal and I test for it, because marijuana stays in our system for ... You've all heard that statement. I'll use a month as kind of the general statement here. I'll talk more about that in just a second. So I did put a little asterisk under the influence piece here, because arguably we can't do cannabis testing now with the new law. There appears to be what I would consider a loophole, because when you read the whole law, it doesn't appear that the legislature was intending to leave, in my opinion, was intending to leave cannabis out of the influence part. So when we read that reasonable suspicion testing piece of the new law, it says you can test somebody who is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Cannabis now will not be considered a drug. It has been taken out of the definition in the statute. So, but the main part of the statute, or the main part of the reasonable suspicion, says you can do drug testing, alcohol testing, cannabis testing, if they are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So again, I think it's an oversight. Others will argue the other way, and I get the argument as well. I'm hoping that this is a remedy that maybe the legislature says, oops, we missed that, and fixes it. If not, it's going to be difficult for your companies when we have somebody who is under the influence. And again, I'm not the attorney piece of this. This is just me reading the statute and kind of lobbing it in from the cheap seats here. So we can do testing, including cannabis testing, if you have a policy for possession, use, sale, transfer, drugs or alcohol, cannabis on the premises, work property, vehicles, etc. And then the last two, injury to self or another, or causes a work-related accident. And I should put a little asterisk by those two, not because of marijuana, but just about 5-6 years ago, I think it was, OSHA came out and said, well, yeah, but like I said earlier, there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that leads us to influence. Now, some of your policies might say, if you are involved in a work-related accident, you're going to get drug, well, I'll use drug as a general term here and put it in quotes. You'll get drug tested. And when OSHA came out a couple of years ago and said, well, if you're going to do that, there really needs to be a nexus between the fact that you believe that they're under the influence and the fact that they were involved in that accident. Now, the accident can be considered, the injury can be considered as one of the factors that leads us to testing. But let's think of this. Let's say we're not going to get any freezing rain here for a while, but let's say we get a little bit of freezing rain, and I come into work this morning and I'm on the production line and it's lunchtime and it freezes. You get a little bit of freezing rain while I'm at my station. And I come out for lunch, like, I forgot my lunch pail in the car. So I walk outside, I slip and I fall on the steps. Well, I've injured myself. Well, you need to go get a drug test. A lot of us would probably go, well, why? Why do we think that impairment has caused that portion of or was related to the accident, to the injury? And we don't. So I will again equate it to what I did for a living. This would be like me going to every motor vehicle crash that I ever went to in my career, which was a lot of them, and assuming everybody is under the influence because they got into a motor vehicle crash, and just walk by and hand everybody a blood or urine kit and say, all right, we got to fill this up for every driver. Well, that would be silly. Okay. It'd be expensive. It would be silly. It'd be all kinds of things. But if I have something, if I'm at the position where I'm like, Don's acting a little out of sorts today, or somebody reports me, I'm like, yeah, I think I see it. We're going to keep an eye on it. And then there's an injury or an accident. Hopefully we prevent that from happening by making sure that we have that discussion before something bad happens. But let's say we don't. Or even after the fact, somebody comes up and says, yeah, I was going to tell you he was acting kind of goofy. Well, I wish you would have told me before the injury or the accident, but no matter, we've got that information now. Now, maybe we have that nexus between impairment and the crash or the accident. Again, so that would be like me going to a motor vehicle crash, 3 vehicles, 3 drivers. I don't just go up and hand everybody a blood or urine kit and say, fill it up. But as I'm talking to the 3 drivers, I'm thinking to myself, this driver here of this pickup truck, something's not right here. And then I focus on that, make my observations. If it leads me to believe that he's under the influence, then I get a test. So we just got to be a little careful. And I'm not saying that we need to change our policies wholesale, but we do have to think a little bit about that. And again, not legal advice. So consult your legal advisors for your particular company to just say, what should we do in light of this? Because it really shouldn't be accident/injury absolutely equals a test. At least my opinion, reading stuff, and again, read a lot of laws over the year, mostly on the criminal side, not on kind of the civil and the workplace side, but have a pretty good understanding. And you look at that and go, ooh, I think you have to make that nexus. So these are the reasonable suspicion testing pieces. Now, when we talk about testing in general, particularly the pre-employment stuff, the law now in Minnesota says that you cannot test for cannabis pre-employment unless you fall into that. They delineated 7 different kind of professions, police officers, firefighters. I don't have the whole list, I don't think, in front of me here, but if you are testing for cannabis pre-employment, you have to consider now that what is their job title. Now, I think we have some fire folks on here, some fire service individuals. So, yep, you can do that as part of pre-employment. But if I'm working for ABC Cardboard and their job doesn't meet one of those kind of 7 definitions, so to speak, or those 7 things that are listed in the statute now, then you have to not test for cannabis on pre-employment. That doesn't mean we can't do it on the reasonable suspicion side. And again, with that little asterisk there for now, and I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that that gets fixed in the next session, because again, I am of the opinion that they just missed that we really should be able to test for impairment of cannabis in the workplace. All right, so some limitations on testing. Now, testing in general is phenomenal. It has been, it has really grown. It has really made some advancements in the last few decades here. I am not bashing testing at all, but just like anything, there's limitations. I mentioned the presence doesn't equal impairment piece, and I'm going to focus on that because of the cannabis issue here. So here's the deal on cannabis and presence of. Now, we have all heard that statement, and again, I'll use a month here. Cannabis stays in your system for a month. Maybe you've heard a couple of weeks. I actually just read a case study last week, 103 days. And they were reasonable, more than reasonably, they were almost positive that this individual had no access to cannabis in that 103 days. And if you read, and it didn't say why, but if you read the case study, he was in some sort of facility. I don't know if it was a jail or a mental health facility or something where he didn't have access, or reasonably sure he didn't have access. So at any rate, he tested positive for cannabis, THC, 103 days later. Now, here's the deal. You'll see 2 things on here, and there's a lot of different metabolites of THC, but these are the 2 big ones. Hydroxy, carboxy, you don't really care about that. The hydroxy, the stuff that gets me high, the active THC that puts me under the influence, you will find in somebody's body, give or take, well, I'm going to use 6 hours. So depending on how much and the potency, et cetera, et cetera. Again, equate it to alcohol. I have 1 beer, that's going to be out of my body in an hour, give or take. I have 14 beers, yeah, it's going to take a little longer to get out of my body. But generally speaking, and cannabis processes differently out of the body. So generally speaking, 6 hours is about that mark. So if I get up this morning at 6 o'clock, I got to be to work at 7. I do a little wake and bake at 6 a.m. Probably till give or take around 2 o'clock, you'll still find that active THC, that hydroxy, the stuff that puts me into the influence in my body. It's the non-psychoactive stuff, the carboxy, that can stay in your system for a month. Again, ... whatever the answer is. And again, depending on how much I use, how often I use, etc. And that's the thing. When I hear individuals that are pro-recreational marijuana say we shouldn't have to do work testing, we shouldn't do DWI testing on marijuana because it can stay in your system for up to a month. And I'm like, well, tell the rest of the story, because that's not necessarily true. If we're just looking for any THC, then yeah, it's going to hit positive. If we're looking for the active THC, the stuff that gets you high, the hydroxy, 6 hours, again, plus or minus. Unfortunately, the thing is with testing, that urine testing really just looks for THC, period. It does not differentiate between the different metabolites. So it will not say there's this much hydroxy, this much carboxy, and it won't tell you the difference. So truly, if I smoked last week, would I test positive today for THC on a urine test? Probably. Okay, probably. Blood tests are a lot better. They will differentiate between the two. And I know a lot of companies kind of do the urine test as the initial screening, and then they'll maybe send somebody to a clinic or a hospital to do a confirmatory test. Or maybe that's the process when you go to the clinic. You might do on site, you might have a third party administer those tests, whatever your process is. Just know that the urine test, if it comes back for THC, we don't know when that individual smoked that, ingested that. Well, I use smoked as a general term here. So I was just at actually the Safety Council's conference here a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, whatever it was, and did a presentation on marijuana, and an individual came up and said, all right, here's the scenario. I'm like, all right, hit me with it. And he says, I have an employee Friday night, goes home, off work, off duty hours, sitting in the back by the fire around the backyard. People are having a couple of beers, and he eats a gummy, smokes whatever. And it's legal. All right, we're past August 1st. I'm like, okay. And he says 2 questions. Monday morning, will he test positive? And the short answer is, yeah. Okay. Again, if depending on the type of test we use. The long answer, or then he said the second question is he under the influence? If he truly did it 56 hours ago or whatever that was, no. Okay. Again, a short window for the hydroxy, a long window for the carboxy. So that might adjust how you test and what you test. And I'm not trying to advise you on how to do certain things, but just with that in mind, that will change now come August 1st for you. So like I said at the outset here, from a reasonable suspicion standpoint, quite honestly, our policies shouldn't change. Our processes shouldn't change. Can't come to work high, period, end of the discussion, that's it. But from the testing standpoint, what do we do now? How do we look for that stuff? Now, I've heard of some companies saying, all right, we're just going to stop testing for THC. Now, I wouldn't suggest that, because some people can still be high on THC. We don't want people high in the workplace. And if we're not testing for it, we can't take action. We can't do stuff per policy, whatever our policy happens to be. So I don't know that I'd go that far. Certainly on the pre-employment, like I mentioned, yeah, we may have to knock that out depending on what our job duties and our job descriptions are of those individuals. So, and blood is a lot tougher. It's a lot more expensive. You can't have a third party come in, fill up the cup. You can't have an individual, and maybe that's trained in testing within the company, say, yep, I'm going to be the tester, fill up the cup. Because again, that becomes problematic. But let's say I do. I provide a urine sample. It comes back hot for THC. I'm sent to the confirmatory. That's typically a blood test. That comes back and it's carboxy, not hydroxy. Well, now we can't pinpoint when I ingested that. And if it's within a few hours after the incident, or whatever that happens to be, you can pretty well be confident that I wasn't high because it didn't come back with the hydroxy. So again, we'll go back to the I get up at 7, I do a little, or 6, I do a little wake and bake. I show up at 7. At 10 o'clock, there's an accident, there's an injury, there's something that I'm going to have to get tested. There's a nexus there that you're going to test me. I hit initially maybe for the THC and then comes back to the confirmatory, and I come back with hydroxy in my system because it's only been a few hours. Probably going to come back. Now we can, that's not a 100% the person was under the influence, but that's a whole lot stronger argument that they were, because the stuff that makes you high is in your system. Okay, so I come back with just the carboxy. Okay, that might have been Friday nights, sitting around the fire in my backyard thing. So it is a little fuzzy. It's going to be a little difficult. We have to maybe look at the testing and how we do our processes and what we look for and what we ask our clinics or whoever does the testing for us, what we ask them to check for. So that might take a little review of policies to get a little firmer understanding. So that's the part that may change because of recreational here. So in the interest of time here, I want to make sure to get through my last handful of slides and get us wrapped up here. So a lot of us have heard about, what about the cutoff? What about the number? When somebody reaches this many nanograms, which is the measurement of a unit of measurement. It's the 0.08, let's say. Is there a number for marijuana like 0.08 for alcohol for driving your car from the legal standpoint? And again, that's just for a DWI. Zero tolerance in the workplace, and your zero tolerance may have a threshold of 0.1 or 0.2. It's not truly a zero, but wherever that lands, there are numbers for certain for alcohol, but for the rest of the stuff, there isn't. Right now, there is no number for marijuana. You've heard 5 nanograms a lot discussed for a lot of states for DWI, for workplace, whatever, but there's really no research to back that up. And as I said, science is pretty great. It has come a long way just in the last few decades. So if there is a number, I suspect science will figure it out sooner than later. Now, sooner might be a decade, but if there is a number, science is good enough, it'll find it. But I don't know that there is, because it works so differently in the body. And I'm certainly not smart enough to figure that out, but I have talked to individuals kind of on that side of it and said, do you think you'll come up with a number? And they're like, we don't know, because a lot of the research that's out there now says there is no number. And I've also asked them, will urine testing ever come to the point that we can look, differentiate between hydroxy and carboxy, the active and the inactive? Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get there either. So, and that's where we stand today. But where we stood 100 years ago with alcohol, it was, well, if you're impaired, you're impaired. It took us until the 1950s to come up with a number, and this just in relation to DWI, but it came up with a number that said anybody over this level is impaired. And that was a 1.5. Took into the 70s that we went down to 1.0. It took into the early 2000s before all the states kind of adopted 0.8. One state is at 0.5 now for alcohol, and if you look at all the countries around the world, we're an anomaly. Us in Canada are kind of the anomaly for 0.8. Everybody's 0.5 or 0.3 or 0.2. So is that pendulum going to swing that much farther for alcohol? Sure. Will that work with marijuana? Yeah, but it might not take us 100 years to figure that out, because science is a lot better. So we may get to that number again. If there is a number there, I suspect that science will get there sooner than later. So a couple of different studies that kind of talks about that, one from the National Safety Council. So just typically, somebody who smokes marijuana, it's a lot different than edibles, but somebody who smokes is generally going to, their impairment, the THC concentrations are going to peak kind of while they're smoking. It goes in very fast, because smoking is the fastest way to get substances into our body. So it goes in very fast, but it takes about 6 hours before it is completely gone. So it goes up fast. It does come down fast, but it doesn't hit bottom. Kind of comes down and it kind of curves out to the end of our run here in our graph. So talked about the hydroxy again, that main psychoactive, pretty quick, 9 to 23 minutes. Research has shown. What little research there is, again, declines kind of rapidly, but we'll still find some in the body. So we talk about blood and urine testing, and quite honestly, it's like, well, if it shows up in blood or urine, the blood's not impaired, the urine's not impaired, the brain is impaired. And if we can articulate that individual, either cognitively or physically, or a combination of those, is impaired, then we can kind of follow what the law says. I'm going to skip that video there. Okay, a couple new things about the law in general here, not specific to workplace, but things that are illegal. So possession. So if somebody is 21 years of age or older, this is the individuals who can possess. 21 or older. Paraphernalia, no longer illegal. So I'm in the lunchroom, I reach into my pocket to grab $1 out for the soda machine, and a brass one-hitter pipe hits the floor. That is not a crime, but it ought to make you go, huh, that's weird. Why would Don be carrying a one-hitter used to ingest marijuana at work? Unless he was ingesting marijuana at work. So that might be something you go, huh, that's kind of weird. Maybe I need to pay attention to this. 2 ounces of flour in a public place. So again, that's the plant material. I can carry 2 ounces. I can have 2 pounds of flour at home. So I can have a big stash at home and take a little bit out, put it in my pocket, take it where I'm going. 8 grams of concentrates and 8 milligrams of hemp edibles. And those are typically kind of the CBD edibles, for lack of a better term there. And I'm not going to dive that deep into the law for you. So use of cannabis, again, got to be 21 years of age. You can use in a private residence, which includes the yard, on private property, as long as the owner allows. So if I'm renting a house, if I'm at some private property location and the owner says, yeah, we don't prohibit it here, okay, we can use it. But the owner can prohibit it. It's their property. And then any business license for on-site consumption. So that's going to come. That's part of the new process too. So kind of like on sale, off sale with beer. On sale means I'm consuming it on the premises. There will be quote unquote on sale. It's not called that in the law, but there'll be on sale marijuana establishments where I can go there, I can smoke, eat, whatever it happens to be on the premises. And there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that, again, beyond a workplace here. Unless you're interested in starting a on-site premises consumption place. If you are interested in that, I just advise you to read the law, because there's a lot of specifics of what you need to do to get that license. So use, again, for use, cannot use in a public place. So now, if I'm smelling marijuana in the park, that's actually a violation. If I'm smelling marijuana in a car, that's actually a violation, because we're out in public. If I'm out somewhere that isn't private property. Now, if I'm in my backyard, my neighbor's using it in their backyard, and I smell it, yeah, that's okay, because they're on private property. But I have a park right behind my house. If the individuals are out in the park doing it and that's where I smell it from, that's a public place. So that can't be done. Nowhere might be inhaled by a minor. So again, if we're out in the park and it's watching the Little League team, I can't do it there, because kids around, minors around that may inadvertently inhale it. And then no use in a motor vehicle. Open package in a motor vehicle, just like open container for alcohol, cannot be in a vehicle on a street or highway. So again, you'll have a policy that says, hey, no substances allowed on company property. That's private property. So that doesn't necessarily violate the statute, but it does certainly violate your policy if your policy does state that. So if you're going to have that policy, make sure that it kind of addresses those types of things. So if I'm in a car, I've got cannabis in the vehicle with me, and I'm on a street or highway, so I'm kind of in that public place. Again, that's a violation, unless it's in the original packaging and that seal hasn't been broken. So they pretty much copied and pasted the open alcohol container law and applied it to cannabis. So I can have a full 6-pack of beer sitting on my front seat, as long as none of those containers are open. I can have a full package of cannabis products on my front seat, as long as the seal is not broken. So once that seal is broken, just like with, if I pop that can of beer, that's the violation. I tear open that cannabis product, that's the violation. Doesn't necessarily mean I consumed it, just can't have the open container in the car. Now, a couple exceptions to that, kind of the party bus exception, the limousine exception, and the pedal pub, and it actually, and I think that is a brand name, but it describes a 6 people, human powered, and it's a big explanation, but it's essentially the pedal pubs, if you've ever seen those. And as soon as I read that, I thought, well, those are operated in public, so you can have the open package maybe on that, but you can't necessarily use it on those. So again, A doesn't necessarily match up with B here. Tab A doesn't match up with slot B in this situation. So looking at that language, I said, okay, so which part of it applies here? So, and again, those are unique situations. It's not likely going to happen, but the owner, if the driver isn't present, is liable for that container. So I have somebody driving my car, whether I'm there or not. The person in the front seat, passenger seat, has the open container. I, as the driver of the vehicle, maybe not the owner, that's a violation for me as well. If I, the owner, am sitting in the back seat because I decided, yeah, my buddy's going to drive because maybe I've had too much to drink or too much to smoke, and I'm going to let him drive. I, as the owner, then can be cited for somebody else in the vehicle having that open container as well. And just like with open bottles of alcohol, if I put it in the trunk, I'm okay. So I have my partially removed contents of wine. I go to the restaurant, I get a bottle of wine with my dinner. They cork it for me so I can take it with me, put it in the trunk, then you're not violating. Even if it's an open container, it's away from the individual, out of their area of control. Same thing with the cannabis here.
Hey,
I'm gonna
Don,
skip.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
The first question, will leases have to be updated by August 1st, 2023, stating not authorized to use? Kelly, can you explain that a little?
If you have rental properties,
Yep.
Okay.
do you need to update the leases stating they're not authorized to use cannabis or marijuana on the property? Because I know that you had stated before, they can or cannot. Then that's why I'm asking, is that if we have
Yeah,
to update our leases and have those re-signed?
I'm going to say I don't know. I mean, the short answer is I don't know, and I'm not sure. Right now, if you say it's a non-smoking, does it have to be in the lease, or can you post a non-smoking sign on your leased property? I guess I'm not sure what the legal requirement is for letting
We
people
have-
know that.
So we have it in the lease that it's
Okay.
non-smoking, but
Is that required
Yeah.
by law that it's in the lease, or is just that it's posted? I guess I don't know that piece.
I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just know that we
Yeah.
had it.
So if the law right now says that if you want it to be a non-smoking of tobacco, and you can just post it on the wall, or or notify them verbally, then I would think it would apply the same for cannabis. If the law says you have to have it in the lease, then I would suspect you probably need to rewrite the leases. And that's just me kind of lobbing that in from the cheap seats here, because I don't know that much about leases.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, certainly.
And then the next one is if a minor is present and in a private setting and an adult is using cannabis, then what? I know that answer, but I'm going to let you answer it.
My understanding is it doesn't differentiate between in public, not in public. It doesn't differentiate where. If there is anywhere where there's minors, and minors can inadvertently ingest maybe the smoke from that, then that's the violation. That's what the law says. That's my understanding, unless you have something else, Lisa.
Nope, that's my understanding as well.
Yeah. Yep. Now, if we're talking gummies, how do you argue that a minor may inadvertently ingest if I'm just chewing on a gummy? But I leave the gummies out on the table and they're around, and and we've seen a huge spike in that. Typically, kids getting gummies because they look like a piece of candy. And a lot of them are. It's a chocolate bar. Heck, they're making everything. It doesn't, we say gummies, but that's kind of a generic term. They're making everything as an edible now. And I actually warn people, when you go to the grocery store, you better be careful, because there's THC infused just about every product in the grocery store. There's probably a THC infused version. So if you're just running through the grocery store quick, you better be and grab a brand that you don't typically recognize or normally use. You better take a second to read it. Yeah, for sure. So one last quick slide here. I know we're up against the wall. We get the question about medical cannabis all the time. And in the statute, it talks about medical cannabis, and this is part of the statute now. And it kind of, the statute has kind of adopted this type of attitude or this type of statement throughout the medical cannabis, that basically says we can't take action against individuals if they are truly in the program. And we can ask them, certainly if we feel that that's the case. Maybe that is on the MRO reviews, maybe it's downstream, et cetera. But, and then I put the emphasis on here, unless they used or impaired at work. You still can't do that. You still can't. But it's my medical. Yeah, our policy is you can't use that stuff at work. Okay, so there is kind of that written exemption, so to speak, for those medical marijuana folks that are in the program. So if they've ingested it and they come back positive, let's say, and you say, aha, they can come back with the, yeah, but aha, I'm in the program. So, but If it's a reasonable suspicion test because you think they're high, the AHA is off the table. They come back and say, AHA, I'm in the program. You go, AHA, so what? You can't come to work under the influence. And that's really where that comes down to. So I think that's about it here. I just want to throw my contact information up quickly here for you. Be a resource for as long as you need me to be, not just the hour here this morning. So please reach out, phone number, email there. I'm going to get the slides together and get them off to Lisa so she can get them to you. You can take a better look at them. And if you've got questions, I'll stick around until the last question gets asked, or reach out after we've left here today and feel free to ask whatever questions you need. I'm going to get out of my share here for you and get a little face-to-face back up on the screen here and take any questions that we may have.
Thank you so much, Don, for
Thank
this
you.
webinar. I do have one other question here that was asked, and it says, working private industry, is SFST still the best way to determine THC intoxication as retired LE? Are they suggested to get training on that on certain intervals?
Okay, well, SFSTs and you probably know which side of the argument I'm coming from. Yes, they are
Yep.
still the best. There are individuals that will argue that they don't work for marijuana. But yes, standardized field sobriety testing that I used out in the field, that is still a great way to determine influence in the workplace. Absolutely. So that type of training, yes, certainly can be brought to the company if you want to train individuals and that kind of stuff. That is certainly something that, contact Lisa and she can work with me and we can come out and do that kind of training for you. Definitely, as a former law enforcement, I think you mentioned, then yeah, those skills that you had on the job still can apply in the workplace.
Perfect. There are a number of emails coming in, and so just so you know, I will be sending out, if we have your email address that's tied to the attendance sheet, you will get the link to this recording as well as the handouts. If you're interested, a few people have asked about yesterday's seminar, just send me an email. I can make that available too. I do want to let you know that Don and Craig are going to be doing a much diver deep into these issues on August 1st. So they will be both with us again on August 1st. It will be 4 hours long. And Don and Craig will be diving deeper into what is the law, how is it going to affect employers. Craig will be talking about that portion of it, and then the safety sensitive piece. And Don's going to be doing a much further dive into this piece. He scratched the surface today, but we'll have much more time to go a little bit deeper on August 1st. So watch your email for that update. That'll be coming out yet this week. And I don't see any more questions, but as Don said, he'll stick
Awesome.
around. So if you want to take off your mute and ask a question or throw a question into the chat, please feel free to do so. Thanks to all of you for joining. This is a topic that is a tough one to get through, and we will do it together. Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
I have a question about federal contracts. We're a rural electric cooperative. We borrow millions of dollars from Rural Development, USDA. I remember seeing at one time a piece that talked about federal contracts. If you received over $100,000, that you are subject to the federal laws for drug use and testing. I can't find that. I'm looking for that. Do you have any clue?
I can send that to you.
Okay, I'll put it in the email,
yeah.
Lisa.
Okay, it's federal grants or contracts.
Yep.
So anything that is federally governed and or, for instance, the DOT, nothing has changed.
Right.
Thank you.
So if you're a federal employee, federal government grants, contracts, etc., but I have that piece that I can send over to you.
I believe my training before told me that employees of an electric cooperative are subject to the federal law, primarily under DOT rules, but also because we receive federal contracts and money, that we need to follow the federal law as opposed to the county or the state laws, which may be more lenient in a political decision that was made.
That's essentially the truth. If you get federal grant money, you're essentially a federal employee, and the feds still say that marijuana is an illegal substance. So they're
Okay.
working under that definition umbrella. That's the
So that
shortest
also-
answer I can give you.
Yeah, and that also applies to the contractors we hire. For example, we have Star Energy Services that does a lot of activities for us with IT and safety, and then there's Cars Tree Service that does a lot of tree clearing for us. They are contractors of us, and we need to provide them our policies and also follow up on their employees to make sure that they're following our rules while they're doing our jobs. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you for confirming that.
So-
And Lisa, I'll send you an email.
That will be great.
So-
And I can, yeah,
So
go
when you
ahead. Don.
send out when you send out the update, a big cover letter on the front going, it might be legal, but be aware.
Yes,
So
thank
you know,
you.
put-
I appreciate this time very much.
thank you.
I did have another question come in. It said,
Okay.
I'm sorry if this was addressed, but what has been done in states where cannabis has already been legalized? Would this be use of Minnesota as well? And so both Don and I have been in many committees, strategic planning committees, and we have been reading and diving into all sorts of reports and data that have been coming out of other states. And I'll defer to Don on this as well.
So hit me with the question again, so I fully understand what we're asking.
They just want to make sure that they want to know what's been done in other states and would this be beneficial in Minnesota as well? So if something's been done, is it beneficial in Minnesota?
Yeah, and then there's certainly a huge learning curve in every other state that, as Lisa said, from whatever angle we're looking at this, workplace, traffic safety, whatever it happens to be, talking to those states, and they said, just be ready because it's coming. Don't let it pass you by. There's a lot of states that unfortunately weren't ready, and they've learned a lot, and we've learned a lot from them. Unfortunately, from the outside in, we can tell the legislature what we think. They decide what they want to decide, which is what the law ends up being. And then as it progresses, we kind of mold it into what we hope is what we would like to see. So there are some changes that will probably come, but reading the law, I certainly don't land on the side of I think we should have recreational cannabis. That probably doesn't surprise anybody that's still on the line here. But when I read it, I thought there's some pretty good stuff in here. The open container in a vehicle, the use in public. So a lot of it, I went, okay, if we're doing it, I guess those things we're doing right. There's a couple of hiccups, like I mentioned on the testing piece, that we went, oh, wait a second here. There's a little hole here. I think we need to fix. And maybe that was intentional. We'll never know. But yeah, we've learned a lot of lessons from other states, and hopefully we've molded that into our law. We'll still be fighting for some tweaks and some changes, like I said, from the outside in, whatever angle we're coming from. But we'll get the best law we can, and as long as we can convince those that are writing it to do the things that we would like to see, I guess. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, so there's certainly lessons learned from other states.
Thank you. Well, that's all I have for now. So unless anybody else has any other questions, thanks again, Don. We appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time and appreciate you. And we will see those of you who want to attend on August 1st, and stay tuned because there's going to be more webinars like this coming up, coming down the turnpike. Thanks. And have
As
a
we
great,
learn more, we'll get more information out, right? So
right.
thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.